We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service.
Welcome to this episode of the PA Path Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lohenry, and we are glad you can join us as we seek to better understand the PA profession.
The whole idea was to find a niche for PAs, because this program's only for PAs, a niche for folks who want to increase their education toward a doctoral level, either in the development of education or leadership or even professional practice.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for episode 54. Today we speak with Dr. Randy Danielson, who is a professor and director of the Doctorate of Medical Sciences program in the Department of Physician Assistant Studies at the Arizona School of Health Sciences, A.T. Still University in Mesa, Arizona. Dr. Danielson is one of the pioneers of PA practice in the state of Arizona and a well-regarded national leader who has contributed so much to the profession and to health education as well. He has served as a primary care PA, a program director, a college dean, a president of both the Utah Academy of PAs and the Arizona State Association of PAs. He was also the chair of the Arizona Regulatory Board for PAs and is a retired United States Air Force and Army National Guard Lieutenant Colonel. In 2015, he received the Eugene A. Stead Award of Achievement by the American Academy of PAs, and he has published over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles, 30 journal editorials, 5 book chapters, and his own co-authored book on precepting by Jones and Bartlett. It is an honor to bring his story to our podcast, and as always, you can learn more about our guests at papathpodcast.com. Randy, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear your story and learn about all of the great things that you've done in the profession over the course of your career. Let's start by talking about your path to becoming a PA. Can you tell us what led you down that path?
Certainly, and again, thanks for the opportunity. Interestingly enough, I have no family members in medicine. There's nobody in my family in medicine. And in fact, when I got out of high school and went to undergraduate, I wanted to be a high school English teacher. That was my claim to fame. And so the first year, I was an English major and a theater minor and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in life. And so I was so confused, I decided to join the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force, and because I was an English major, I said I want to be in communications. And so they said, no problem. This is back in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I got to Lackland Air Force Base. And on the third day, the drill sergeant came up and said, okay, 2 lines, the cooks in this line and medics in this line. And I, yeah, and I said, no, I'm in communications. And you can imagine when the sergeant said, well, Mr. Communications, you're going to be a cook or you're going to be a medic. And so I didn't want to be a cook. So I got in the medic line and so became an Air Force medic. And after that training, went off to Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. You're well aware of that Air Force Base. And ran across this staff sergeant who was my person who took charge of me. And he said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm going to do everything. He says, okay, follow me. And he took me under his wing and spent a week in the shot clinic and a week in the lab. And he just took me under his wing. And after about 6 months, got me in the ER and then flight surgeon's office and then in the physical exam section. And after 2 or 3 years of that, I learned about this new concept of physician assistant, or actually I learned about the MEDEX program at the University of Utah and thought that might be something that I wanted to do. And so I applied and was lucky enough to get in class 4 of the Utah MEDEX program. So that was, in those days, we had no clue, as you know, what the profession was all about or what it was going to be. It was really going to be up to us to decide what that was. And I was fortunate enough to go to Utah. And then when I graduated, worked at a small rural town in Utah called Kearns, Utah, for the first 5 years. So
Okay.
that was the quick story, the Reader's Digest version of becoming a PA.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we had Ruth Ballwig on back in the beginning of or season 2, and she talked about that. She talked about how medics had supported the development of the program in Utah, and I think at Charles Drew, and so that's interesting to tie that story together. So you practiced for 5 years in primary care, rural medicine, family medicine out in Kearns. What was your next step?
Yeah, I wanted to do something more. So at that time, I packed up my family and we decided to move to Phoenix, Arizona. I enjoyed Arizona when I was in the Air Force at Luke Air Force Base. So we moved there and I went to work for an HMO for a number of years, and then for Maricopa County in their primary care clinics. And then what's now called Cigna, or was called Cigna then, another HMO. And so, I did over the next 20 years, primary family practice, did some emergency medicine in some of the ERs in the city, and then some OCMED. And also I did some asthma, allergy, and immunology over those next 20 years in Arizona.
So you were in Arizona at the beginning of the profession here, and you definitely got really well involved in the state organization and also in the licensure and regulation part. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, when I moved to Arizona in 1979, they'd been in existence. The state association had been in existence probably 4 or 5 years, and they were just developing some enabling legislation. And in fact, early on, you had to decide whether you were going to be an allopathic PA or an osteopathic PA. So they had 2 different boards. The state association started lobbying and in terms of combining those boards. So early on, we developed the joint board on the regulation of PAs. And at that time, it was like 20 members made up of allopaths and osteopaths and no PAs. They had ex officio PAs. But, we kept working with the legislature and had some wonderful legislators that really supported us. And then years later, was able to develop what now is the Arizona Regulatory Board of PAs that is PA specific, 5 PAs, 2 MDs, 2 DOs, and 2 members at large. Okay. So, participating in a state organization was so essential then as it is now in terms of getting things done. And at that time, we probably had 200 or 300 PAs in the state, and now we're well over 3,000 or 4,000.
That's amazing. I think about the time when one of my mentors in Illinois encouraged me to support the Illinois Academy of PAs, and there were probably 12 people out of the, 600-700 PAs in the state that actually were involved. And it's crazy to think about this because our destiny is controlled by that activity. You really need to be educating and advocating for your profession to the legislature, not only to maintain what you have, but to gain additional autonomy and practice rights. So kudos to you and everybody else that's been involved in ASAPA.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. It's not something that you had to make a conscious decision. It was something you just did because your future was right there in front of you. And you, like you said, you wanted to be responsible for your future rather than having somebody else be responsible for it.
Yeah. I think I always think about Dawn Morton Rias, who says it's better to be at the table for dinner than be on the menu. So
well said. Yes.
Yeah. Well, good. So, Randy, you've got 20 plus years of clinical experience at this point. What led you to join the academic world?
Another great question. I was involved early on also with the American Academy of PAs, early on a number of committees and on the board of directors. And I ran across a wonderful lady by the name of Marvis Larry, who was the program director at Wichita State University. And she was saying one day, Randy, would love to have you come out to Wichita, Kansas. I didn't even know where that was, and come work for us. And I thought, well, what an opportunity. So I applied and was accepted. And I took my family. We moved out to Wichita, Kansas, and worked at the PA program there for a year. And after about a year, I get a call from the PAs in Arizona who said, hey, we're bringing a PA program to Arizona from, at that time, it was the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, and starting a PA program, and we want you to come back and help us run it. So I talked to my kids and they started packing right then. They said, we wanted to go back to Arizona. And Marvis Larry was a wonderful mentor of mine and gave me the opportunity to come back to Arizona. So, Rick Davis and I really were the primary faculty members of starting what was called then the PA program at the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine Southwest Center that was actually on the campus of Grand Canyon University. And,
wow.
So we started the program, and then after a couple of years, we changed the name to the Arizona School of Health Sciences. And in 1999, the college actually became a university, under the auspices of the Higher Learning Commission, and became A.T. Still University. So a little history there, but we had a little building on Grand Canyon to start our first program.
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember learning about that because I graduated from osteopathic medical school. Midwestern University, which had been similar to Kirksville. It was the Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine first. And then when they started bringing in the other health professions, they turned that into a university. And then, of course, came down to join you down in the Phoenix area on the opposite side of town shortly thereafter. So, yeah. Well, I guess the Arizona School of Health Sciences is a little bit easier to get on a shirt than what they called it previously.
Yeah. And in fact, we actually had some colors. We had some great colors for our shirt. It was actually red and white and blue. And I guess we upset a bunch of folks down at the University of Arizona, so we changed our colors.
Yeah, well, that can happen. I get that. So you and Rick started the program down there. You get it going. And at some point in time, you get an opportunity to become the dean of the college. So tell us about that transition.
Yeah, Rick, after a number of years, decided to go off and go back home to Florida and became the program director of Nova Southeastern University and later dean. But so I filled his shoes as chair for a couple of years. And in 2004, the Arizona School of Health Sciences had grown. We had started with PA, PT, OT, and what was called sports healthcare. And when we got out to the new campus and then we became A.T. Still University, they decided to create a dean because there was no dean prior to that time. So they created that position and I applied for that and was fortunate enough to become dean in 2004. And really was at that time, it was only KCOM and us as part of A.T. Still University. And so my job was to help grow that school. And since that time, we added audiology programs and then we started adding the post-professional programs. So after a while, there were 5 disciplines and about 14 different programs. So it grew very quickly, and so I had to learn how to be an academic dean, sort of like being thrown in the water and learn how to swim.
Yeah, back in 2004, there weren't that many in PA that had risen to a dean of a college at that point. It might have been Rick, you, maybe, I don't know, maybe Dawn Morton Rise at that point.
Yep, Dawn was a dean at that very same time. Yep.
Yeah, that's impressive. Obviously, one of the things I've learned from being an associate dean is that the dean's office is always being pressured to look for new revenue streams. When I think about this connection with Rick Davis now makes a lot of sense to me because the 2 institutions that really pioneered doctorally trained PAs and, a postgraduate doctorally trained track was Nova Southeastern and A.T. Still, right? Right.
Exactly. Yeah, becoming a dean is a wonderful opportunity if you get the chance, but also going with that is a lot of responsibility, particularly with multi-disciplines, and also particularly if you're working for a private not-for-profit organization where 85-90% of the revenues is tuition driven. Yeah. And so it really comes down to not only providing quality education to the disciplines, but having enough seats, and at some point you have to look at increasing the number of seats to be able to have the kind of revenue that you need to run an effective program. It's kind of a catch-22. You want to keep the faculty-student ratio workable so that you do a good education, but you also want to keep the lights on. And I've always said the further up the ladder you go, the further away from the classroom you are. And that's not good because we all love working with our students. But as you said a minute ago, it's nice to be at the table. And I was able to help develop at A.T. Still our first council of deans because we had the medical school They had us, and then we started another medical school and another dental school. So pretty soon we had 5 deans. And so we created a council of deans, and it became a very important organization looking at, how do we work together to make sure that that we get enough revenue for all of us to be successful, in our discipline. So, it was a wonderful opportunity to start at ground level.
Yeah. So often in my career, I think about my colleagues who have been frustrated by their budgets. They believe, and some programs do have this kind of opportunity, but very few do. They believe that every dollar of that revenue from tuition should go back to the program. And they don't see the benefit of the larger institution having some tax to help the institution keep the lights on and the marketing and security and all those other things. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that in terms of how you navigate that.
Quick little story, and if Rick Davis ever listens to this, he'll confirm it. When I was the associate director of the program and Rick was the director, and he came to us one year and said, well, we're going to add 5 more students, 5 more seats in the class. And I was upset. And I actually wrote a letter of resignation and gave it to him. That says, I can't teach 5 more people. I don't have enough faculty. And he took the letter and put it in his drawer and said, go back to your office. We're going to be fine. And then the next year I'm in his shoes. And then the year after that, or a few years after that, I'm the dean. And you're right. You have to look at the big picture. And I was fortunate because I created the Chairs Council, and we would meet once a year looking at budgets. And first thing you do is you turn in your budget and you turn in your capital requests. And most of the time, once you get to the table, you've asked for 5 times more than the available money. And so
Sure.
What do? You can fight between one another. You can argue, but what I really liked is the chairs got together and said, okay, this is why I need this particular FTE or why I need this particular capital expenditure. And the other folks would say, well, I could postpone what I needed for a year so you can have this. And it turned out really well. So we go back to the provost and the president, with a recommendation that's workable for everybody. That's the only way it'll work. Otherwise, somebody else above you has to make that decision for you. And they're happy to do it. So I call this participatory leadership.
Sure. And when you say capital budgets, as I understand capital budgets, traditionally that's going to be when you're looking to build space, you need some significant equipment expenses to deliver but like ultrasound machines or things like that. It's not typically going to be related to your personnel, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Probably the biggest expense, as you know, in your budget is personnel. And the second biggest is capital expenditures, like you mentioned. We need more equipment. We need some more high fidelity sim men. Of course, the physical therapists want their kind of equipment, and the occupational therapists need equipment. So you have to work that out, and it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, but to your point, you said one of the better parts of being a dean is that you're at the table and you're having an opportunity to be innovative. And one of the things you chose to do was to take on these postdoctoral programs. So let's talk about kind of the impetus for that and how that started for you.
Yeah, I guess there's 2 points. One is the first thing we started related to PA was because we started as a master's program. There were still all of those folks out there like myself who graduated from a certificate program or a bachelor's program that now wanted to get their master's degree. And so we created what we call the advanced PA program, much like Nebraska did at the same time, if you remember, and developed an online program for practicing PAs, a pathway to get their master's. And it was very successful. In fact, we just sunsetted that program this past year. It's out, after 10, 12, 15 years, it met its purpose. Well, the same thing occurred when I was dean and we were looking at the health professions, particularly PAs, but others who wanted to move into getting a doctoral degree, but didn't want to do a traditional route of PhD or EDD. Because that's 4 or 5 years of your life, over $100,000 plus, and you just wanted to do something that was going to give you an opportunity to get a degree in a shorter period of time that perhaps was more professional in nature. Anyway, we actually stole the idea from Rick Davis at Nova Southeastern, who had created a Doctor of Health Science program. And I called him, and he shared with us his successes. And so we developed that program and created it, a 50 credit hour program over 3 years for health professionals who wanted to get a doctorate, particularly PAs, PTs at that time, although they've moved to DPT, occupational therapists, lab tech, social workers, all those kind of folks who wanted to do it in health science. And it was very successful and continues to be successful. In fact, that program now has been moved over to our sister school, the College of Graduate Health Studies.
And you were doing online education way, way before anybody else.
Yeah. Again, we sort of patterned our programs after Nova Southeastern and Rick Davis, and it worked well. It was, someone could say, sort of like walking into a buzzsaw. I mean, you had to learn quickly, particularly with technology. I mean, even 15 years ago, technology was a big problem. It worked sometimes, it didn't work sometimes. What learning platform is the best? And, if you had the right bells and whistles so that you had the right platform, number one, then you had to market it to the right people. And then you had to figure out what the prerequisites were. And then you got to hire the faculty who's willing to teach online. And almost all of them are, full-time clinicians somewhere else. So a lot of work to do it. And so, yeah, we've been able to do that over the last 10 or 15 years. And I'll be honest, as terrible as COVID was, the one silver lining is everyone's learning to teach and online.
Yeah, I think that was a huge, huge change for all of us. And it is probably the only good thing about COVID is that we were forced to equip ourselves with new tools on how to meet students where they need to be met.
Yeah.
So how many graduates have you put through the doctoral programs to date, roughly?
You're speaking about the Doctor of Health Science program, the one we created?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, probably that program now has 2,500, 3,000.
That's amazing.
Graduates, and of course, the Doctor of Medical Science, another topic, is a fairly new phenomenon in the country, and we could talk about that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. What's your take on the DMSC?
Well, obviously I'm biased. This idea is a product of Dr. Bert Simon, who was chair of our PA program, and about 5 years ago started saying, we want to put together an online doctoral program, a professional degree for PAs who don't want to do the long route with PhD and EDD, but they want to get something that's going to help them in their practice, in their leadership roles, and their education roles. And he and his faculty put that together, and we jumped through all the hoops with the regional accreditor and the state accreditor, and we launched that program in 2018. In fact, I stepped down as dean to take the reins of that, and Bert stepped down as program director to become the associate director. And the whole idea was to find a niche for PAs, because this program is only for PAs, a niche for folks who want to increase their education toward a doctoral level, either in the development of education or leadership or even professional practice or other areas that's going to make them more employable and give them that doctoral ticket. And, our values for the program has always been, we want to make sure that it has doctoral rigor, that it's student-centric because these are our colleagues, and that number three, that the degree means something. And so that when they graduate with that degree, that it means something. And at that time, there were just a number of us out there. There was a Lincoln Memorial in Tennessee and Lynchburg, and A.T. Still was really the three programs that started a DMSC. And since then, there's been 5 or 6 others, including Rocky Mountain and Butler, and I probably can't remember all of them, but many folks who are now, following that same pattern, trying to get our PA colleagues to have a ticket out there.
And these are still postgraduate doctoral trainings. It's not intended, at least, to be part of an entry level perspective.
Right. The whole concept was for it to be post-professional and for practicing PAs or even retired PAs who maybe wanted to, once they've retired from practice, want to come back to, academia. So all of the programs that are out there now are post-professional programs, and they're recruiting everything from new graduate PAs to PAs that have been in practice 30, 40 years. We had a student who was 70 who graduated from our program last year.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. What a great story. Because I think every colleague I know who's done that program or done the Lynchburg program or others, they all come back with new skills, new perspectives. The value they bring to programs, and I'm sure to the clinics where they work, is really, really impressive. So congratulations on a really thoughtful approach.
Well, and thank you. And, the future of that particular degree is in the hands of the graduate. And anecdotally, what I'm thrilled about is once our PAs graduate from the DMSC and they come back and tell us what they've done. I've moved into this role. I've moved into academia, or I've moved into a leadership position, or into the C-suites, or I've done this or I've done that. And that's the future and the value of the degree. What I tell applicants for the program is, I don't want you to give me your tuition and just because you want to come and put a doctor after your name. Let's make it worth something and mean something when you get out there. And they're doing that. And I couldn't be prouder.
Yeah. Well, so there's been conversation in our profession about an entry-level doctorate, and that drum has been kind of beaten on and off for a while. The doctoral summit was, I think, in 2008 originally. And now we have some colleagues who have really been stepping on the conversation again to see if we can move into a doctoral trained entry-level PA. I'd love to get your take on that, and what are the pros and cons from your perspective?
Well, I was going to be trite and say, how about those Cardinals? But because that is the controversial question of the day. So you asked for it, I'll give you my opinion. First of all, let me tell you what my opinion is worth. I now represent 6.5 of the PA percent of the PA profession, and that's PAs over 65 years of age. So that's who I represent. And so the future of our profession is really in the hands of our current students and our new grads. But I do have an opinion, and that is that a doctoral entry-level degree for PAs is inevitable. I think the train has left the station, and we have to decide whether we're going to be on it or not. I do think it's going to be the way of the future. I think it's going to take 5-10 years, for that to happen. And if you look back to the 80s, we had the same argument with them going from bachelor's to master's. But we have the same barriers today that we had then. And that is, what does a doctoral curriculum for PAs do to the length of the program? And we have to decide what that's going to be. Number two, we have to decide what the prerequisites are for that and how we include that doctoral rigor in the PA program for it to be credible. And lastly, and probably most importantly, how do we continue to recruit diverse students? We don't do a great job of that now. And if we move to a doctoral entry level, it's again going to disenfranchise, diverse students. We have to find a way today and in the future for that not to happen, because I think that's an important component of our profession, not only the PA profession, but all the healthcare professions. We need to do better. So, and lastly, the reason for doing this, besides getting a good education, is parity with our colleagues in the healthcare, not only nurse practitioners, but our physician colleagues. So I think parity is going to be important. I know there's a lot of conversation. I know that in 2023, there's going to be PAEA has another group getting together to take a look at recommendations. And we have to answer those questions before we do it. And we should do that in a thoughtful manner.
I participated in that 2008 doctoral summit, and I thought it was really well done in the sense that, they brought in other professions, other perspectives. There was a lot of data to review. It was a very well coordinated meeting. And at that point, the feeling was, based on the learnings from nursing, PT, OT, et cetera, was that the main group that really benefited from a doctorally trained whatever were the universities, because they were the ones bringing in another year of tuition. And I find it interesting because as I was going through the University of Arizona faculty curriculum process, the first comment that I received from my colleagues at Arizona was 108 credit hours is a doctoral program. What are you doing here? And they're right. But the content that we have to teach to prepare our students to practice medicine as part of a team, it's voluminous. And so to your point, I think, how do we how do we navigate that? Do we just add a year? That seems just too simple and also maybe not appropriate for the cost of training. But then what do we take out?
Wow. I wish it was a simple question with a simple answer, but it isn't.
Yeah.
And because currently, and we rightfully so, we have the ARC PA standards, in terms of the requirements of a quality PA program. And most of those are 24 to 27 months just to meet the basics for a primary care PA. Yet we know when our PA colleagues get out and practice, over 70% of them are now working in specialty practices or subspecialty practices. And the whole onboarding for that is another issue. So it really comes down to the length of the program. And I've had the same issue that people say, my program is 110 credit hours. Just give me that doctorate degree. I earned it. We can argue the difference between doctoral education and PA education, but I think there has to be some place in the middle, and maybe it has to deal with accreditation and whether we're going to move to, requiring specialty education. Another controversial issue from even 10, 12 years ago with the NCCPA was we like to maintain our generalist bent as PAs, yet most of us are working in a specialty practice, and we're asked, if you work in endocrinology, how do I know that you're competent in endocrinology because you took a generalist exam? So all of those things play a role in this thing moving to a doctoral level. Do we want to follow the same plan that our physician colleagues have, where there's the entry-level program and then the residencies into certain areas? And I know that people will say, bite your tongue. But,
to your point, Randy, like the CAQ process, when that first came out, everybody was convinced, well, not everybody, but many people were convinced that was going to kill our profession by putting us into a residency state. And to date, that hasn't happened. I think folks that have ended up in those specialties have sought out a specialty exam to demonstrate competency and also be able to garner better wages in a situation and keeping up with their colleagues that have specialized in those areas. So it's an interesting challenge, right? It's very complex when you think about it.
Absolutely. And I'm not advocating that we have specialty programs, entry-level programs. That would make no sense. But if you look out there, if you look online right now, there are well over 80 post-professional fellowships or residencies for PAs. Everything, from emergency medicine to orthopedics to, psychiatry, all of those things that many of our colleagues are feeling that that's an important thing for their future, is to get that advanced training, if you will, to get into a particular job. And then when you get that niche in that job, it does become harder to move away into a different field.
Do you think that some of the programs have marketed their doctoral, their DMSC to residency programs as a dual kind of opportunity? And I've seen residents, particularly I'm thinking about San Bernardino and the ER residency, where they go to get their DMSC while they're in the residency and graduate with a doctorate as part of their postgraduate training program. Do you think that might be the wave of the future?
I do. We're certainly doing that. We're reaching out to our colleagues who are the directors of the fellowship or the residency. And it makes sense to me that let's take, for example, a surgical PA who does a year in surgery. Seems to me that year could be part of advanced standing in a DMSC program. And then that person could fulfill the rest of the curriculum, the core courses that's required, for that DMSC. So I think that ought to be worth something. Getting the certificate is good, and also that experience is good. But in my mind, it'd be nice to have a doctoral component of that, so that when they graduated, they also got the DMSC.
Yeah. Well, Randy, I appreciate your time. Before we go, I want to ask you one more question, then open it up to you if you have any additional thoughts, which is, you have a long-standing history of leadership in our profession, both with state and national organizations. You've had the pulse of the profession for many, many years. You've contributed so much, and I'm very grateful for your mentorship and your contributions. As you look back, what are the things that you're most proud of related to your role with the profession?
Wow. First of all, thank you for your kind words. I'm most proud in terms of my professional work. of the development of teams over the years, where, when I first got involved with the AAPA in that would have been 97, we got a group of people together for the Public Education Committee and developed the first ever public service announcement for the profession. And it was a group of 6 people, our colleagues, that sat around a table and started developing that. Today, that's doing PSAs are really easy, but back then it was hard and to get that word out. So, and I use that as an example that when we as PAs stick together, we can have our differences, we can have our opinions about things, but it's still sitting around the table and finding ways to make things happen. And so I think things like in the early days of the AAPA, I'm very proud of the kind of work that we did. The development of the House of Delegates was another one of those things. And I think the other thing that I'm most proud of from the profession is getting into education and being one of those pioneers that sort of break that bubble, moving up the ranks in academia. So, and I guess the third thing is just being thrilled to be part of creating the future of the profession by educating PA students and watching what they do. I mean, you and I have been in education for a long time, and we run across our grads and you go, my gosh, what great things they've done. And I think you said it the other day when we were speaking about standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, that continues to happen. And as long as we have those giants to stand on their shoulders and create new giants, we're going to be successful.
Yeah. I just last night, University of Arizona had a welcome reception for the 3 new health professions programs that they're starting. And it was just amazing. I had so many graduates that are in the Tucson area and other PAs that, were interested in the startup here. And several of them were from my first class at Midwestern University as a director. And so to your point, I think there's nothing more rewarding than to see them grow as professionals after you've had a chance to be a small part of their lives in their career.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a great grandson who's now 6 years old, and I was talking to him when I was in Phoenix last year, and he introduced me one day. This is my grandpa. He's a principal. And I thought, I can do that.
You are. You're a principal leader in a very big, important profession. Oh, that's fantastic. Is there anything else that we didn't get a chance to talk about, Randy, that you'd like to share before we go?
Well, first of all, thanks again for the opportunity, and thanks to the many colleagues of mine out there who've given me the opportunity to be part of a wonderful profession. I mean, I think for me, it's 48 years now. I keep telling people I started when I was 12, but nonetheless, thanks to all my colleagues who have accepted this really shy kid from Idaho to be part of the profession, and it's been an honor.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for joining us today. I know that our listeners will be excited to hear your perspective. And we want to thank our guest, Dr. Randy Danielson, for his time and his incredible service to the profession. The amount of things he has contributed towards our profession are too numerous to discuss in one podcast, but suffice to say, he has truly done it all. Tune in next week as we speak with Dr. Bridget Calhoun from Duquesne University. Dr. Calhoun shares her unique path to becoming a PA, her path to becoming an HIV researcher and expert in infectious disease. And we also talk about the program that she led for over 20 years that focuses on a high school to PA pathway. Until next time, we wish you success with whatever path you are walking in life, and thank you for joining us. The purpose of this podcast is to provide news and information on the PA profession and is for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official position or policies of the University of Arizona.